Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled How to Take the Ransom Out of Ransomware. I'm Kevin Collins from Unitrends, and I'm here with Dave LeClaire, Vice President of Product Marketing, and he'll be taking us through the presentation today. And don't forget, one lucky attendee will be walking away with a $100 Amazon gift card. We'll contact the winner after the live event. But before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded, and after the event, you'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar. I would also encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by typing them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand corner of the player, and we'll answer your questions at the end of the session. At this point, I'll turn it over to Dave. Enjoy the presentation, and Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to everyone who's joining us for today's session on taking the ransom out of ransomware. So this certainly is a hot topic. Just looking around at trying to find some news stories on this as I was researching for this webinar, this has really made its way into pretty much everybody's mind. It's not just in IT, it's showing up in press, in the mainstream media as well, and the predictions are pretty dire. Basically, you have things coming from Information Week saying, the worst is yet to come on ransomware. You have CNET and TechCrunch and others basically talking about the rising threat. This is going to be the year of ransomware. The ransomware crime wave is being talked about even on CNN. And LA Times even had something that basically said 2016 is shaping up to be the year of ransomware, and the FBI isn't helping. And on that last point, part of the reason why that point was made is because there's really very little, if you're not prepared, that you can do if you get hit with a ransomware attack. This quote was made by one of the assistant special agents for cybercrime at a recent conference in Boston a few months ago, where the FBI pretty much told a security audience that, to be honest, ransomware is so good that they often advise people to just pay the ransom when they get infected, if you haven't prepared and done backups. So what we're going to talk about here today is a little bit on the history and a little bit of background on ransomware. Then we're going to talk about what you can do proactively to prevent yourself from hopefully being infected, but that's really a challenge. This is becoming such a menace that it probably isn't a question of if you're going to get hit. It's really a question of when you're going to get hit. But there are things that you can do to minimize the damage when you get infected, and there are certainly ways of avoiding having to pay a ransom to get your data back. So we're going to talk about that from a protection standpoint, from a backup standpoint, and talk a little bit about Unitrends and how we can help there as well. So let's start off I think most people are, certainly if you're attending a webinar on ransomware, you're probably very aware of the basics behind it. But just to level set everyone, obviously ransomware is a form of malware that encrypts victims' files with strong, unbreakable encryption. They demand payment for a private key to unlock your data, the files that have been encrypted. And typically the payment that's demanded is in the area of $200 to $500 in Bitcoins. So that's kind of just the high-level basics of it. But ransomware is not new. Matter of fact, ransomware has been around for well over a decade. What's really new is within the past couple years, really the last 24, 22 months or so, there have been some very rapid advancements that have made it a much larger risk and something that you really have to be aware of. Early versions of ransomware really were scareware or nagware. They were things that infected your system. They pop up a message on your screen and try and convince the user that you had been infected with a whole host of viruses and the only way to get rid of them was to pay the ransom. Or they would start popping up on your screen really annoying images, perhaps inappropriate, not suitable for work type images on the screen and demand a ransomware to remove the infection that was causing that. They didn't permanently lock your files. Generally speaking, it was pretty easy to remove with standard virus protection. And even if you did get infected, you could usually kind of work around it and survive. There wasn't a really good way of collecting fees anonymously. So as a result of that, the criminal that were perpetrating this really didn't have a good form of revenue stream coming in. So the advancements were not coming very rapidly because the kind of risk reward wasn't there. And the hacker community really wasn't as organized as it is today. Many of these things were done by, younger college kids or others that were kind of just trying to be a little bit of anarchists, a little bit of disruption, doing things to annoy. That has all changed within the past couple of years. The real turning point in this growing menace of ransomware really came in the second half of 2013 when the now infamous CryptoLocker first appeared. And CryptoLocker really changed the game on ransomware. CryptoLocker was the first variant of ransomware that used strong, unbreakable, typically an AES or type 256-bit encryption that unless you're the CIA and have supercomputers, you're not going to break that. It's pretty much uncrackable. They also started to collect fees through bitcoins and found other ways of hiding their activity so that they could collect fees anonymously. And as a result of this, we started to see the crime syndicates that were perpetrating these get much more organized. Many of these attacks start from overseas. They start from countries that are beyond the reach of the FBI or Interpol or any of the other kind of modern cyber government or police activities. And they're very, very highly coordinated. We've started to hear about black markets where they're working together, they're trading code, they're trading lists of infected computers. And because they've now found a way of getting a secure revenue stream that is now totaling in millions and millions of dollars of payments flowing in, they now have revenue to actually invest in R&D. So the days of these programs being kind of perpetrated by individuals is unfortunately going away, and these criminal organizations are now running themselves essentially as companies, investing in R&D and coordinating and partnering with each other and sharing revenue. It's really quite a different world that's developed as a result of what's happened with what started with CryptoLocker. Many different variations and copycats have popped up. CryptoLocker was simply the first. We have Torrent Locker, CryptoWall, CDT Locker, Tesla Crypt. Locky is one that's fairly recent, but there's literally hundreds of these things. They often go by different names. Sometimes they'll actually borrow names of other ransomware. A lot of variants actually that are not CryptoLocker actually use the CryptoLocker name because it has name recognition. But there's a lot of different versions of these things that are out there, which makes it very, very hard for virus protection to stay on top of this. So what they almost all have in common is they all use essentially similar kind of techniques, but the variants have different execution models. They use different forms of encryption, different forms of technique to network back to their servers, and different forms to basically maintain anonymity online. But they all have kind of those components in common. So what we see in the different variations is typically they're using some form of unbreakable encryption. Some use an AES-based encryption. Some use an RSA encryption. Others will use what's sometimes called curve or elliptic curve cryptology, or ECC. They're all extremely uncrackable versions of encryption that are used to encrypt files. Typically, they focus on, at the very least, high-value files that are going to have data you want, Word files, pictures, data files, etc. And they encrypt the individual files with a public key and then demand payment to get the private key to unlock them. The other thing they have in common is that, generally speaking, there's one or two that break this model, but most require a network connection back to a command and control server somewhere. They use different methods for how they can go back and communicate to those servers. Some will actually communicate over Tor. Some will use an I2P network proxies. Others just use basic post over an HTTPS connection, and some even just use hard-coded URLs. Most actually are starting to use, if they don't already use, some form of process in order to hide where the servers are located. So many of them use Tor, particularly for collecting payment. The payment server actually will go through various proxies that hide where those servers actually live and give some anonymousness to the actual server. They almost all demand electronic payment, almost universally in Bitcoins. Bitcoins are a bit more trackable than they were a couple years ago, but they're still more anonymous than trying to get a credit card payment or some other form of electronic payment. So they'll typically ask for 1 Bitcoin or something like that, and Bitcoins kind of range in price from, typically right now they're floating around $400. But the different variants, in many cases, the person who's actually implementing it will set a rate based on what they think for the particular market, the particular geography, and the particular user that they're targeting that will kind of guarantee payment. They're kind of using basic laws of economics. Don't set the price too high because nobody will pay it. Don't set the price too low because you're leaving money on the table. It's really kind of quite devious. As I said, they're running these things now as businesses run themselves. So the main key here really is that they are using standard public-private key encryptions. So I think most people know how this works. You encrypt with a public key, and then you need a private key in order to decrypt. So what they're doing is, in many cases, they can start encrypting your data locally, contact that command and control server to generate a private key that's specific to your machine, and then that is actually what they hold back. So they know exactly what's been encrypted on your machine. They know the private key that's going to be required for that specific implementation. And they'll withhold that key until you pay the ransom. There's a variety of different infection vectors that they use. They typically come into kind of 3 forms. One would be kind of a spam delivery vector, the way a lot of viruses are delivered. Others are also using exploit kits that are also similar to how other viruses are delivered. The exploit kits may be something that actually kind of does a search and destroy, is looking for vulnerable systems that are out there, or it may be tied to some sort of kind of malvertising, a ad that's sitting on a dubious website waiting for somebody to click on it in order to launch the exploit kit, which will redirect you to a server that's going to do bad things and basically load up your system with viruses. The different means of delivery, from the kind of hacker point of view, there's different advantages and disadvantages. Both spam and exploit kits have proved highly, highly effective in being able to get into systems and get the ransomware installed. We've seen spam email campaigns kind of be the preferred mean for CBT locker and torrent locker. We've seen CryptoWall and Tesla Crypt kind of be the preferred means using exploit kits. Spam has the advantage, quote-unquote advantage, to the person who's perpetrating these, in that it can affect fully patched systems. Even if you're completely up to date on security, if someone clicks on that spam message, you're going to get infected. The downside from their point of view is it does require interaction from the user. So there's a lot of effort going in on their behalf to make these very enticing in order to get clicked on. Exploit kits are almost the opposite. They don't require any interaction. They simply require the ability to find a vulnerable piece of software that has a security flaw that has not been patched yet. And those can either be done by servers that are kind of know where those servers exist. We've even heard of other virus software that may have been installed on systems, kind of renting out lists of vulnerable systems to ransomware attackers so that they know, the system at this IP address has this vulnerability. If you go attack and get something out of it, we'll split essentially the revenue that comes out of it. So again, getting very organized here with very effective programs. We are seeing, since the CryptoLocker came out in 2013, we have seen these programs continue to advance as well. Recently, we've seen the first versions of ransomware that are now voice-enabled. So instead of actually popping up on your screen, they'll actually read out the message to you. Apparently, it's supposed to be kind of more threatening to actually have your speakers kind of come alive and broadcast the message to you. We've seen very highly localized versions, particularly of the versions that are using spam as an infection vector. What we see is variants that are targeted at a specific geography, and they will only attack IP addresses that live in that geography. The spam messages are written in such a way that they use localized language, and these don't look like spam messages that we see every day that have grammatical errors in it, and it's obviously written by somebody who doesn't speak English if it's coming at an English speaker, or speaks French if it's coming at somebody who speaks French. These are highly localized. Their grammar's going to be perfect. They're going to look like they come from a government agency or a bank that's in that region, and they're designed to be highly enticing for people to click on, and they have been proving very effective. We've also seen advancements. The early versions of ransomware largely targeted Windows-based systems. Macs were pretty much being left alone, as was Linux. Within the past couple months, we've started to see the very first versions of ransomware start being targeted at Macs as well. So this really kind of is starting to become open season on any platform that has a lot, particularly of end users using an operating system. And last but certainly not least, this was an evolution that I think they learned they had to do to basically prove that they actually had public keys. Most of these variants now offer the ability to get one free decrypted file. So they've encrypted hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of files on your system. They will allow you to decrypt one file. And what this is doing is it's proving that they really do have the private key, and that if you pay, you will get your data back. And it's almost a free sample to prove we're not bluffing and that we haven't done something to your files that is irrecoverable. So again, it's a way of trying to prove and be more effective at collecting money. So how does an enterprise in particular make sure you never have to pay? When I think of this, I think of kind of putting together a sports team, whether it's a basketball team, a baseball team, football, soccer. You generally want to have a balanced offense and defense. You want to make sure that you're able to proactively go after what they're trying to do, and you also want to put in some countermeasures from defense that if you do get infected, there's ways to kind of minimize the damage or even prevent them from kind of getting a score on you. But probably just as importantly, you can't forget about backup players on your sports team. Frequently, that's the difference between winning and losing, is who has the deeper bench, who can withstand taking a blow. And it really is the case with ransomware as well. So kind of using this analogy, when we talk about offense, you want to start with some basic protection. Be proactive, do everything you can to kind of prevent the ransomware from getting into your systems in the first place. Obviously, you want to keep your software up to date. All your operating systems, your Microsoft applications, Adobe applications, anything that is proven to be a possible infection vector needs to be kept up to date. When the patches come out, they typically include security patches, as you know. If you don't install those, you're leaving yourselves open for these attacks to find their way in. Of course, you want to use virus detection, antivirus prevention. However, we have seen that that's not a foolproof method of keeping ransomware out. We see time again, we hear from both customers and prospects that they had virus protection in place. Ransomware did get through. The virus protection eventually did catch up and find the ransomware, but by that point in time, they had X number of systems that had been encrypted, and they had to rely on backups to get them back. So by all means, yes, virus protection, antivirus protection, absolutely critical, but don't rely solely on that. Education's also very important. Work on educating your users on security protocols. Make sure that they know that they should be avoiding clicking on untrusted emails and attachments. You need to advise them to watch out for not only obvious executable files that are coming in attachments, but not so obvious ways in. Microsoft macros in Microsoft Office applications are a popular way in. We're seeing these ransomware things be delivered through RAR files and other types of compressed files that a typical user is probably not going to recognize as an executable file. Those of us who live in the IT world will recognize that those are. Most users will not. They're not going to recognize it like they would an EXE. So education can certainly go a long way towards stemming the tide here. Defense, this is some of the stuff that's I think a little bit more proactive, and it's more about having a countermeasure that if the software with ransomware does get installed, what can you do to make sure it doesn't take hold? We obviously talked about disabling ActiveX content in Microsoft Office apps for years. That one's pretty obvious. A couple other things that you can think about is have your firewalls block Tor, ITP, restrict ports that don't need to be open. This is all trying to block those active ransomware variants that need to call home to an encryption server to get those keys to block that communication from happening. And if you block it, they can't encrypt. Therefore, you're going to prevent some of these infections. Now, not all of them need to contact their CNC server to actually do the encryption. Some actually can start before they actually make that connection. So this is not 100% foolproof, but it's something you can do to block some variants. Another thing you can do to block some of these variants from actually running is most of the popular ransomware installation use installation paths that include things like %temp% or %appdata%. They install into those directories. So if you block binaries from running from those directories, again, you can prevent them from getting their execution engines going, and you can kind of stop them before they really get started. And last, as I said, backups are crucial. It's crucial for your sports team. It's absolutely crucial for ransomware. So how do we know this? I mean, here's some very real-world examples that I pulled straight off of Twitter, straight off of SpiceWorks. These are real-world users who have basically told us, yep, got hit with ransomware, and my antivirus either missed it or it caught it, but it caught it late. and the fact that I didn't have to pay was completely because Unitrends was there with backups, able to restore, in gigabytes or in some cases terabytes worth of data. Having a good backup solution, a good continuity solution in place is absolutely critical to make sure that you never have to pay that ransomware and you can kind of shrug it off when it hits you. It can, at that point, it just becomes an annoyance. So when we think about protection in general, we always kind of start with the rule of three. So the basic rule of three basically tells you that you should have 3 copies of your data across 2 different media types. In other words, don't have everything just on disk. Have it on disk and cloud or disk and tape. And make sure at least 1 copy of that data is off-site. So this is a good basic rule. As we look at modernizing data protection, it may not be 3-2-1 anymore. It might actually be 4-2-2 or something like that. But generally, you want multiple copies of your data spread across multiple media types, and you need to make sure that you have some isolation, some geographic separation between at least a couple copies of your data to make sure that you can withstand the different types of outages. And this is certainly true when it comes from ransomware. So when we look at best practices to make sure you never have to pay ransomware, one, you want to back up all data in your system, not just critical data. Your user data is likely to get encrypted, and while it might not be the end of the world for your business, it might be a really bad day for your user if they happen to lose all their files that have been stored on their system. We, of course, always advise to try and get RPO and RTO windows as low as possible, and replicating and using continuous data protection techniques are absolutely great for that. Every few minutes, do kind of a snapshot, get copies of what's changed up into your backups, but you have to be careful that you're not backing up the malware along with your data, which is the reason why kind of having that off-site copy that goes to cloud or gets put on a tape and goes somewhere is important as well. You want to make sure that we always have at least some separation and that we're not backing up everything so quickly that we're also backing up the malware and having that be affected. Ideally, we want to create archives, as I said, that are physically isolated from your production systems. You can use those archives to go back in time if necessary, because that's really what we're doing here, is we're using the backup to go back in time to the point where before we were infected. Creating bare metal images of core systems. So you want to, if you have a server that gets infected with ransomware, or for that matter, has any sort of downtime event, you want to be able to restore it as rapidly as possible. So ideally, what you actually have is the ability to spin up workloads in a different environment than that production server, giving you time to create that production server. So either use instant recovery techniques that are available from backup. We'll talk about those in just a second. Or create bare metal images that allow you to kind of quickly restore your core systems. The last thing we want to talk about is certainly prepare now. Don't wait until it's too late. As I said, we're hearing repeatedly from customers that they're getting hit. They put everything in place and they're still getting infected. The variants are coming faster than the antivirus protection software is able to keep up. The infection vectors using spam and others are becoming more devious. So we really want to make sure that you're protected with the best backup and recovery solution you can have in place before you get hit. Cloud certainly can help. Local backup, we tend to recommend that you actually have a hybrid cloud kind of implementation for backup. It really gives you the best of both worlds. Allows you to actually have local backup using a physical appliance or a virtual appliance software so that you can quickly restore locally if you have a single system that has an outage. But we also recommend actually using cloud for your offsite protection. Unlike tape, cloud can be fully automated so that you're not having to have somebody spend time rotating tapes and sending them off and Cloud can be fully automated and still provide that isolation between your production environment and your backups that is important to make sure that you have that isolation to prevent the ransomware from getting into your backup as well. When we look and we talk about features of backup solutions, specifically regarding ransomware, there are a few things that I think you really need to look for and make sure that your capability is able to do this. One is instant recovery capabilities. So instant recovery provides the ability to spin up workloads from your backups in minutes while your production system's being cleaned. So you use the backup appliance. If it's a physical appliance or a virtual appliance, you can actually use the appliance resources to run a workload and spin it up within less than 5 minutes typically and get that workload back up and running using the last known good backup, which will allow you to basically clean up that production system, do all the reinstalls, do a bare metal restore, do whatever you have to do to basically get that production system off, and then live migrate back to the production system. It really does minimize the downtime that you actually have on your critical workloads. The other thing we want to look for is the ability to protect Windows, Windows Server, and Apple Macs. Because Macs are now kind of a target for ransomware, we need to make sure that we can protect all those different operating systems. This is a differentiator that Unitrends has over a number of other solutions, as we do a huge variety of operating systems that we protect. And last, certainly not least, this is not something that's talked about a lot, but most backup software runs on Windows systems. Therefore, it's possible to have your backup system, including your backup software and all of your backup data, get encrypted as well. Running on a Linux-based backup platform, you largely prevent that. There have not been Linux infections to date. There's been some rumors of some of them, but I haven't seen any of them yet pop up. And if they do, they're certainly going to be less popular than Windows infections. So by having a Linux-based backup solution, you can prevent your backups from being encrypted as well, which would absolutely be a worst-case scenario to have not only your production servers encrypted, but your backups encrypted as well. So we really want to avoid that. So how can Unitrends help? Unitrends really is working on trying to reimagine recovery for the digital world that we live in. We have what we call our connected continuity platform that brings together the industry's leading portfolio of cloud-empowered backup and recovery and continuity solutions into a single platform. We've tried to make this as easy as possible, make it as intuitive as possible to provide you the most flexibility to bring our solution into your environment, whether you have physical workloads or virtual workloads or cloud workloads. We want to be able to protect all of that. And we want to basically provide it with a solution that can give you confidence that you're going to be able to recover no matter what comes your way. So this is kind of a view of how we view the connected continuity platform. It really starts with continuity planning. We actually do have some solutions. We have a site called bcdrlink.com that will walk you through best practices for building a continuity plan. Of course, we have our physical appliances as well as our software appliances that we sell, as well as really the backbone for our connected continuity platform. But we're able to augment that with a huge variety of cloud continuity solutions as well. We have our own Unitrends cloud that does cloud storage of backups, disaster recovery as a service, and other recovery capabilities as well. We also support hyperscale clouds such as Google Cloud, AWS, etc. We also provide, as part of this platform, recovery assurance capabilities that allow you to basically have complete confidence that your backup environment and your DR environment is going to work the way you'd expect it to. So when we look at this platform, we want to be able to protect everything that you have. We want to be able to deliver that continuity wherever you need it, whether it's in your primary location, a secondary location, in the cloud, in a hyperscale cloud, wherever you want it. We want to be able to provide guaranteed recovery, because nothing is worse than going home at night wondering, are my backups good? Is my recovery environment going to work when I need to rely on it? And we want to do this within a single platform across all your physical, virtual, cloud workloads. By doing that, it really eases the burden on you as the IT administrator to basically be able to get on with your job and get on to more critical projects as well. So when we say protect everything you have, we pretty much mean everything you have. All told, we protect over 220 different versions of operating systems, hypervisors, applications, etc. So whether you're running your workloads physical, virtual, in the cloud, regardless, we probably have protection for that. As I said, we have continuity pretty much anywhere you need it. So it starts, of course, with local on-premise protection using one of our Recovery Series physical appliances or our Unitrends Enterprise Backup virtual appliance. But from there, we're able to move backup copies really wherever you need them. If you have a service provider that you're working with, they can use our software to create a cloud environment. You can use the Unitrends cloud and have one solution from a single vendor for both on-premise and cloud. If you prefer to actually do this yourself and put it into a second site, or work with a hyperscale cloud, whether it's Amazon or Azure or Google or Rackspace, we have solutions that will work with those as well. We also, when we talk about guaranteed recovery via recovery assurance, we want to make sure you have absolute certainty that you're able to recover. So we've had this technology built in that automates the testing of your backups and automates the testing of your DR environment, whether it's local on your premise, in your DR site, or in the Unitrends cloud. We automate that testing and we create certified recovery points. So we test your applications, not just that they boot up in the operating system, but we actually test that they work. So if you have an end-tier application with multiple dependencies, we test all those dependencies, and we certify that that's going to recover exactly as you'd expect it. So you don't get surprised when you need to rely on that environment that your backup didn't work properly or your DR environment has drifted out of compliance with your production environment. So we test that, we validate that your RPO and RTO goals are being met in actuality, and we deliver you a report that confirms that to you so you can actually have complete confidence in your environment. And we do this through an incredibly easy-to-use user interface, and we deliver automated reports like that RTO compliance report to you. So this is how we are transforming continuity. We're giving you both on-premise protection as well as cloud-based protection with recovery assurance, and doing it in a flexible manner that meets however you want to basically deploy. We think this is an ideal solution that protects you not only from ransomware, but from any other type of downtime incident, whether it's a hardware failure, a user error, a natural disaster, or unfortunately, more and more frequently, ransomware. So what makes this unique? That scalability and flexibility, that intuitive UI, and that recovery assurance is highly differentiated from what you're going to find from anybody else in the industry. So we would love to talk with you further about this. We've been doing this for a long time. The company's actually been in business since 1989. We have thousands of customers globally. We have thousands of registered partners globally. We protect exabytes worth of data today. And in our own cloud, we currently have approximately 30 petabytes of data that is being managed. So we really are working hard to try and redefine recovery, and we'd love to help talk with you about what matters most to you. So if you're ready to not worry about recovery again, if you can imagine not spending as much time on backup and DR tasks as you have in the past, we'd love to have a conversation with you. So with that, I think we're going to open this up to some Q&A. I'll leave this up. We actually do have a couple things that you can go to on our website. You can go get a free trial of our Unitrends Enterprise Backup today. And we actually do have a new ebook on the 7 new rules of recovery that does talk a little bit about ransomware, as well as some of the other new rules that we think are important to you. So with that, I'm going to invite Kevin back in, and I think we're going to take a few questions.
Thanks, Dave. Great presentation. We had a lot of good questions come in, so we'll just dive right in here. The first one comes from Brian, and most of what he's heard on the internet suggests that that paying the ransom doesn't actually get your data back. Have you seen anything or heard anything about that as well?
There's certainly been cases of that, and I think that's why you've seen the get one free thing pop up. Actually, I have heard more. I think again they're running these things as businesses. For the most part, you will get a key back that will decrypt your data. There are cases where it may not work. It may have encrypted your data, and because it was unable to get to its CNC server, it actually didn't. It actually doesn't have the private key that can be created back for you, and things like that. So they can't tie back, when you got infected and what key was used to infect you. So therefore, there have been instances where it doesn't work. But more often than not, I have heard that paying does get your data back. However, we're just by paying these ransoms, we're just making the problem worse. We're giving them a revenue stream that they can invest in more devious attempts and literally investing in their own R&D. If you talk to security professionals, you'll hear some say don't pay under any circumstances. Others, will tell you, like the FBI, if you want your data back, that may be the only way you can get your data back, which is the reason why we think it's important. Get your backup and recovery solution in play, and you don't even have to worry about it. When it gets hit, it's just like a hard drive fail. You do a recovery just the way you would if the hard drive had just failed with that data, and move on.
Okay. So the next question is from Aaron. So he's asking, with cyber groups sharing what computers they have hit, does that mean that once you're hit, it's increasingly likely for you to get hit again by others?
I think it's possible. It's certainly if you've been infected, maybe not even with ransomware, but you've been infected with a keystroke log or something else that is, I don't want to say more benign. That's all these viruses are pretty hideous. But if you've been infected, that system may actually be on a list to use that. They'll either use that piece of infected software that's already on the system. They may actually open up a backdoor for ransomware to be installed through there, or they may basically send a signal that, hey, this is an unpatched system. You can use the same hole I did to get in. So again, follow the best practices, patch those security holes, keep up to date in your software, etc. But again, these organizations are getting very organized. They're getting very good at what they do. I've heard stories of black market transactions going on, exchanging data, exchanging servers, exchanging code, etc. So again, backups are your best defense here. It's probably not a question of if, it's just a question of when you're going to get hit, unfortunately. And as the news headlines that in my first slide said, it's going to get worse, unfortunately.
Okay. Dan is asking, if I have replication or other similar methods in place and I get hit, wouldn't it hit the replication just as quickly? If so, I don't understand kind of how instant recovery works.
Okay, so yeah, and that's kind of what I was talking about by having, if you solely have replication in place and you are replicating, virtually in real time, yeah, you're probably going to get infected almost instantaneously on both sides. As a matter of fact, they may actually find, some of these variants will find not only the hard drive that they're on, but they'll find any other connected system as well. Even if it's a USB drive, they'll infect and encrypt the USB drive files. So it's the reason why we need to not only worry about kind of our recovery time or recovery point objectives and get them as small as possible, but we still need to basically take snapshots and make sure that we have clean snapshots that allow you to roll back in time. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. You know, when we talk about how to protect yourself from all these different environments, we talk about, you know, the importance of doing kind of incremental forever and replication kind of technologies to shorten your downtime window for things like when my hard drive fails, or if something, you know, a user does something stupid and deletes a file. That's different than here. We have to kind of use slightly different techniques. But those same techniques are probably in place because you're taking snapshots, because you may have, you know, a grandfather, father, son policy in place for archiving. So there's a lot of different things going on here. So, you know, putting together a comprehensive continuity plan really involves thinking through all these different scenarios and making sure that you have the various different techniques in place. So, you know, if you're using simply, you know, SAN replication that's local, you're probably not doing enough. You're probably not doing enough to basically get that copy off-site, you know. And you're putting yourself at risk not only for ransomware, but you're putting yourself at risk of what happens if I have a fire and I have no geographic separation between those two. So that's one question. The other question was really about how instant recovery works. Instant recovery does use a backup. So basically, you know, we have a complete set of your data that's actually on our backup appliance. And what we are able to do is use that, and it's similar to, if it's a virtualized environment, we might live migrate the kind of vMotion. If it's a VMware environment, we might vMotion the workload over to actually run off of the compute resources that are actually running on the appliance. So you're using the backup as your essential storage for that point in time, and we're keeping track of the changes so that when you bring your production back in line, it will get synced. But we're actually using the compute resources that actually reside inside the appliance. So you can bring that production system completely offline, do whatever you need to do to basically clean it, and then when you're ready to bring it back online, we kind of live motion back from the backup appliance back into your production environment. And because of that, we're able to do that very quickly. There's not a lot of data that has to move around. We're simply kind of almost rebooting your environment, just similar to how you would if you were vMotioning with inside a VMware environment, if that makes sense. We have some white papers on instant recovery as well. If people are interested, you can certainly go to our website and download those as well.
And Lauren is asking, how often should you test the backups, that your backups are working properly?
You know, I think this is a question that probably depends on your workload, but you know, more critical workloads, I think you should be testing more often. You know, we have customers that are testing critical workloads once a day or maybe even a couple times a day. The way to do this, though, is to use that recovery assurance technology. You do not want to be testing these things manually, or else you'll be doing nothing but doing that. Testing backups, testing DR environments, it's disruptive, it's time-consuming, it's not exciting, nobody really wants to do it. With our recovery assurance technology, we're able to automate all that. So you can basically set up those tests one time, set up how often you want the tests to be run, and what your expected recovery time and recovery point objectives are going to be. And then let the recovery assurance automation technology take over from there. And they will test in a sandbox environment using your backups that your environment is completely recoverable. So not only are you testing that your backup is good and that it hasn't been encrypted or even, you know, VMware had a pretty awful change block tracking bug, you know, earlier in the year that potentially was causing backups to not back up properly. Recovery assurance would have caught that because it would have tried to use those backups in a sandbox environment and actually use it to actually run a workload. And we would have validated that, oops, that backup's not good for whatever reason. And it will flag it to you so that you know that well in advance. You'll get a report, however often you want, delivered to your inbox. And, you know, if you're in compliance to all your RPO and RTOs in actuality, you're good. If something's gone out of compliance, you can do something about it. And it's way better to do that, you know, at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon than it is to try and do it at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night in the middle of a blizzard, because that's not the time to figure out that your backup your recovery environment is not working properly.
Okay, Rob is saying you talked a lot about the cloud today, and that's all cool. I work for the Danish state, and we have issues with where our data can be stored. It has to be in the EU. Can you guarantee it will be stored where we ask or want?
Yes, we will. If you're talking about the Unitrends cloud, we have Unitrends cloud environments in the U.S., Canada, UK, Germany, Australia, and we will provide you with a guarantee for data sovereignty that your data will not move outside of those geographies. If you actually need it within a specific geography, so if Germany or UK wouldn't work for you for whatever reason, even though, so if, those are in the EU, obviously, but if you needed it within a specific geography, this is why we provide, support for some of the hyperscale clouds that we work with. If you have a preferred relationship with Amazon or Microsoft or Google, and you wanted to use a cloud that they actually have in region, or you actually have a managed service provider in region, and we do have hundreds of them around that are spinning up essentially private Unitrends clouds for their customers' use. There are other ways of basically making sure that you have full control of your data. And we know that flexibility is important, which is the reason why we really have what we kind of call an open sky philosophy. We're going to make sure that we work with as many cloud providers and give you the maximum flexibility to meet whatever goals you want. For some users, it's going to be using the Unitrends cloud, and others, it's going to be using another cloud. And we will work to make sure that we support all those.
Okay, question from Tyler. Does restricting binaries, we use a highly locked down SRP, prevent against the exploit kit versions or only the user-involved spam versions?
Those should actually work against all of them, because really what the infection vector, whether it's a user clicking on it or the exploit kit kind of installing, at some point you still have those. Once it's installed, it still needs to execute. It still needs to find, and there's a number of different ways that they execute within your environment, and it's probably way more detailed than we want to get into in this call. But essentially, once they're installed, they all operate in a similar manner. They're finding some way to basically hide themselves. They'll either run as a process within your environment. They may actually try to shut down the main operating system process and restart it up under their control so that they can completely mask themselves. There's a number of resources on the web that you can look at if you're really interested in how these things work. But for the most part, they all at some point need to run. They need to install just like any other application, and they need to get triggered off to run. And if you can block that execution from happening, you'll block some of them.
All right, we've got time for a couple of more questions. Here's a quick one from Mark. Is there still a free version of Unitrends for a small number of hosts that you can run in VMware?
There is a free version. Yeah, we have a product that we actually call Unitrends Free, which actually will run on an unlimited number of hosts, unlimited number of VMs, unlimited number of sockets. What it is limited on is it will only protect up to 1 terabyte of data. So that's 1 terabyte of protected data. You could have 20 terabytes actually when you count all the different versions or different copies of your backup. But we'll protect up to 1 terabyte of data with Unitrends Free, unlimited sockets, unlimited VMs, no time bomb or anything. So that is the main Unitrends Free product we had. We used to have a version that was socket limited or number of VM limited. That has been replaced with the Unitrends Free, and you can download that off our website. It's essentially the same software as our Unitrends Enterprise Backup, with a few things like deduplication and a few other things, more advanced features turned off. But in essence, it gives you all the things that our main software does. It gives you instant recovery. It gives you the ability to protect virtual workloads, physical Windows workloads. It does not provide the ability to connect to the Unitrends cloud, but it does provide the ability to replicate data into AWS or Google or Rackspace or any of those other things that are supported by our Cloud Hook feature.
Okay. Last question. We're running out of time here. Dan is asking, if I'm already using encryption like BitLocker, have you heard if ransomware can further encrypt my encrypted files?
It's a good question. They're typically looking for file extensions that they're going to encrypt, and there's a long list of file extensions that they look for. You know, they're looking for DAT files that are in databases. They're looking for Microsoft extensions and PDFs and everything else. I guess it depends on what your encryption software is actually doing to your environment. Is it just encrypting the data inside the file, or is it actually encrypting your entire file system? I really haven't heard too many cases where that's happening, but I honestly don't know, and I don't want to steer you wrong.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. We're just about out of time. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded, and you'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version within a day or so. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to having you on future webinars. Thanks, everybody.